Declare the meeting open at 6 p.m. The City of Inson would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Obviously, Mayor Cole is currently not with us, so I believe she is just running late at this stage due to family commitments. We have no members on approved leave of absence. I was just looking at my empty chair. So we'll move to public question time and the receiving of public statements. We've got some people joining us in the gallery, so welcome. Through the public statements, we ask that you come up to the lectern, you state your name and the suburb that you live in, and the item or the matter that you're wishing to talk about this evening. Everyone gets up to 3 minutes. The CEO will be timing, so if you hear the buzzer go off, we just ask that you wrap up your statement. There's no fixed order, so it's first in, best dressed in relation to the comments. So I'd invite the first speaker up to the microphone. And thank you. The CEO has just reminded me that we do live stream our meetings, and we have started to live stream our public question time. So if there is any member who does not wish to take part in the live stream, you can let me know and we'll just get you to speak at the end. So please go ahead, be happy to do so.
Okay. Hello, my name is Robert Gemelli. I live on the boulevard in Mount Hawthorn. And my matter is that I've recently just purchased a solar panels on my roof, and it's probably been brought to your attention before. The verge trees are getting far too high. I mean, on one side it's cut because of the wiring, obviously, the signage or whatever it is. On our side it's not, so the trees grow huge. Because I have a single story, around 3 o'clock, 3:30 every day, I get shade on these panels, and it's costing me probably 2.5, 3 hours of power a day, 15 hours a week, where I could be getting free electricity. Now, I've been communicating with Emma Cole through emails and said that some sort of tree policy that's been out to stop trees being cut, even though they're able to be cut from the, if they protrude onto your house. But what I'm basically saying is that individual cases should be, this policy you've got with the tree is outdated. I believe it goes back 4 or 5, 6 years. And the solar panels now is a big business. It's growing business, and a lot more of these panels are being installed on the roof. And the council has to start looking at individual cases, people that want the trees cut by the council. I've gone and done the right thing because it's the neighbour's tree. It's a huge tree. It's quite shabby anyway, and he wants it cut in half, or basically the same as the other side. I've done the right thing. He's given me the okay for it to happen, and I want it to happen, and I can't because of the council policy with this tree cutting. I'm just asking that you start looking, because of the popularity with these solar panels, that this rule that you've got, I don't know, I believe is outdated and should be seriously looked at pretty much straight away, because I don't think I'll be the only person complaining. And I've seen a tree further down Boulevard completely chopped in half, and they blame it on the tree people got confused. But I know they had solar panels put on their roof and they did it purposely. That's my opinion. There's no other way. But this is going to be a continuous problem. So I just urge you guys, or the people, the authorities, or whoever is responsible, that each individual case should be looked at. It's not ruining the street. Having the tree cut in half to benefit me and benefit the green as well, not using the power, I think is a good thing. And I don't want all trees to be cut down, but just the council look at individual cases, not destroying the tree. All I'm asking is that us as residents just get some sort of like fair look at, in a sense, because at the moment it's sort of like an open shut case. No, this is the policy. We're trying to save the trees for this and for that, but I'm trying to do the same thing with these solar things. And you guys on your website promote these solar panels, and you actually even give, I think, the last time I looked at it, us people to go and get quotes off, So pretty much that's my thing, and I just really want you to really look at the policy that you've got at the moment, because I believe it's outdated. I keep repeating that, but I really do believe it is, and because of the popularity with these solar panels, I just urge you, please, to start changing the rules. You know.
Thank you,
All right,
Robert.
thank you very
That's
much.
your 3 minutes. CEO, do you have any comment, or would you like to provide a response in the minutes?
Through your Deputy Mayor, if we could liaise directly with Robert following the meeting about that, his particular issue on the street, we can have the Parks team speak to Robert.
That's okay then? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Okie dokie. We have in the agenda the response to previous public questions taken on notice from the council meeting, the ordinary council meeting on the 28th of July. Thank you. Apologies. I was not aware we were still taking written questions, given that we're back in the chamber, but please go, Executive Manager of Governance.
Through you, Councillor, Deputy Mayor Gontaszewski. So we've received 3 statements and questions. The first one is from Sally Lake of Highgate in respect to item 12.6. The question and statement is the answer to Andrew Main's question of 28th of July about street trees says that the staff use of the street tree selection tool together with the current policy and consultation, and they act on a case-by-case basis. On page 22 of the 4-year capital works program, which is item 12.6 in the agenda, it shows future expenditure will be determined on a reassessment of the street tree master plan. The questions are, is there an existing street tree master plan? If yes, is it currently used to assist in decision making? And will the city make the street tree selection tool available to the community for their own use? For example, place it on the website. The next set of questions is from Dudley Marr of Highgate. The first question is, at the last meeting, I asked about one of the typos in the built form policy, which resulted in council approving the policy with ambiguous lot setbacks. The response was that it is a typo which will be corrected without coming back to council. The first sub-question is, why is the administration assuming what council intended rather than bringing the change back to council for clarification? And also, while in this instance, it would not be logical for somebody to appeal in relation to this clause, if there was an appeal, would the city's response be, it's the vibe, Your Honour? The second question is, at the last meeting, I asked about requirements of the built form policy for all applicants to submit an urban design study and meet specified sustainability performance standards. The answer said that the administration has been advising proponents of the requirements rather than saying that they are mandatory. Here, the 2 sub-questions are, how many development applications submitted since 11th of July 2020 have provided an urban design study and demonstrated the required sustainability performance standards? And the second question, how many development applications approved since 11th of July 2020 have provided an urban design study and demonstrated the required sustainability performance standards? The third question is, the reason that I ask is that I have heard on the grapevine that 1, some staff do not support these requirements for all DAs and feel that they are imposed by council, and 2, staff are ignoring these requirements for applications that can be decided under delegation. Will all future development applications be required to adhere to these 2 requirements, or do staff have some internal guidelines which indicate when they will turn a blind eye? The fourth question is, at the last meeting, I asked if recent percent for art grants conform to the Newbury principles. The answer said that the imposed condition was consistent with those principles. However, my question was about the application of the condition rather than the imposition of that condition. There is a nexus between the planning condition and the percent for art policy. The policy is explicitly mentioned in the standard condition. The policy gives a clear indication that projects should result in a tangible physical works of art which improve the quality of the city's built environment, which is objective 2. I'm not questioning whether some of the projects are worthy or not as arts projects per se. It is about whether the use of developers' contributions are in accordance with the policy, or whether the percent for art is just used as a tax on development. There are 4 questions relating to this. Do all recently funded projects comply with clause 2.5 of the % for arts policy and the definition of professional artists? When were the ABNs for each of the artists made active? What is the postcode of each artist's home address? And prior to today, was clause 3.5 of the policy complied with? And if the response refers to COVID-19 committee, when was the power to approve the projects delegated to that committee? And the last question is, what council workshops have been held since 24th of June and what topics were discussed at each workshop? A comment was also submitted by Andrew Main of North Perth in respect to item 10.4 on the agenda. The comment is the aim of the long-term cycle network should be to quickly increase the number of cycling trips and people of all ages and abilities riding a bike. I do not believe it will achieve this. One of my key concerns is the approach to place secondary routes on distributor roads with high volumes of traffic. Even if these routes were permitted by Main Roads WA, they will take a long time to build, are very expensive, and they are undesirable for bike riders due to conflicts with vehicle drivers and the noise and air pollution from vehicles. The solution is, wherever possible, to place these routes on roads designed as access roads in the state's functional road hierarchy. The aim of the plan should be to minimise conflict between drivers and riders, because when you introduce conflict between motorists and bike riders, the bike riders will always lose out. Placing the routes on access roads precludes the need for expensive, safe, active street treatments of $1 million per kilometre. Instead, routes can be made safe by preventing drivers using local roads, except for those that live on the street or are visiting people that do. This can be done through the use of model filtering approach, examples of which are already present in the city. This approach is far less expensive and quicker to implement. There's some comments on specific routes. The Burke Street route should not be a secondary route as it is a distributor road with high volumes of traffic. The secondary route should be placed on Emerson and Richmond Street. View Street should not be a secondary route as it is a distributor road with high volumes of traffic and is also on a steep hill, which makes it very undesirable to ride on. Claverton Street should be the preferred route. Ango Street should be a secondary route for the same reasons as View Street. Albert Street should be considered as the secondary route instead. Vincent Street should not be a secondary route as it runs along the footpath, crosses many roads, driveways, and there is conflict with pedestrians. Emerson or Richmond Street should be the preferred routes. And Norfolk Street, I do not support the new idea to turn into Raglan Street, then on to Ethel. Raglan is a narrow street on a steep hill. It is, you must turn off Norfolk Street, then Chelmsford or the lane behind, which would be better options. However, my preference is that there be a shared path built on the northern boundary of Hyde Park, taking riders to Throstle Street. This path would also benefit other users of the park, including accessibility for people in wheelchairs and pushing prams. They are all the questions and statements. Thank you.
Thank you. CEO or Executive, is there any comments in relation to the questions asked by Dudley and Sally, or comment from Andrew?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, we can respond to the first 2 sets of questions in writing. I'll just see if the Director would like to mention the liaison we've been doing with the Department of Transport on the LTCN.
Yeah, through you, Deputy Mayor. So if I deal with Mr. Main's questions, Mr. Main took full part in the consultation. He gave written responses and he attended the workshop in person. Having a quick read of some of the comments, these have already been raised. So there's one new thing in there, I think. So we'll make sure that's passed to the DOT. And as you know, the document is in essence a living document and can be changed, at various stages. So we'll make sure that that comment's passed on.
Thank you, and thank you to Sally, Dudley, and Andrew for their comments. We've got the response to previous public questions taken on notice included in the agenda. And now we will move on to applications for leave of absence. Are there any applications, CEO?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, no, none received.
I don't believe we have any petitions, deputations or presentations this evening, no. So we'll move on to confirmation of minutes. This is for the ordinary meeting of the 28th of July 2020. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Moved Councillor Hallett, seconded Councillor Loden. All in favour? Let's accept announcements by the presiding member. I have none. surprisingly. I mean, I could speak about the adoption of the long-term financial plan, but I think that which is, I think, probably one of the key items on the agenda, but I will do that when we deal with the item. Declarations of interest, CEO.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the only declaration received is as provided in the minutes in relation to the briefing, which is from Councillor Toppelberg in relation to item 9.4, extension of temporary change of use planning exemptions. The extent of the interest is that a family member has utilised the exemptions in order to change the use of a property they own at 301 Fitzgerald Street, West Perth. Councillor Toppelberg is not seeking approval to participate in the debate or to remain in chambers or vote in the matter. That's all.
Thank you. Okay, so now we will go around the chamber to identify any items that councillors wish to pull out for further discussion. So far, I've noted the adoption of the long-term financial plan and the long-term cycle network, so 12.6 and 10.4. Remind me if there's any absolute majority items. 9.3, the strategic community plan. Okay. Is there any other items, Councillor Hallett?
9.2 and 12.1.
Councillor Castle.
And 12.7.
Nothing for you, Councillor Castle. Councillor Wallace? Nothing. Councillor Batakis? No. Councillor Loden? No. Councillor Smith? No. Councillor Toppelberg?
Plenty, thanks. 10.1, 12.2, 12.3. And yeah, 12.5.
I'm just going to go through my list and see where we're at. Okay, so CEO will just read out the items, the few items that we'll be moving on block tonight.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, I'll read out the list of the items that have been identified to be moved en bloc by Council, which includes items 9.1, item 10.2, and items 11.1, 11.2, and 11.3. That's all.
Can I have a mover and a seconder?
Sorry, can I just, I think 9.4 has to come out because it has a conflict.
Would you mind just reading that list again, CEO?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, items 9.1, items 10.2, items 11.1, 11.2, and 11.3.
Can I have a mover and a seconder for the en bloc items? Moved, Councillor Fotakis, seconded, Councillor Castle. All in favour? Declare it carried. Okay, we will now return to the items raised from the public gallery. First on my list was item 12.6, adoption of the long-term financial plan for the period 2021 to 2029-30. Can I have a mover for this item? Moved, Councillor Loden. Can I have a seconder, please? Seconded, Councillor Wallace. Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. A quick question. In terms of timeframe, I know that we ideally were planning on having this come to Council in February, but something called COVID-19 came along. In terms of process for next time round, is the intent for the LTFP to come in around about February of 2021 for the subsequent financial year?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, we don't have an intended time frame, but it would be linked to the mid-year the quarterly budget reviews that Council will be undertaking. Part of the adoption of this long-term financial plan is that we would certainly be coming back to Council to suggest smaller updates and amendments if there were any decisions made throughout the year that would impact on the long-term financial plan. So we would probably be suggesting that each time we do that quarterly budget review, that we have a section or a consideration by Council of the implications to the LTFP. So it might end up being updated on a more regular basis, as I don't like to use the word living document. It's a 10-year financial plan, but we would hopefully be able to start that conversation with Council when we initiate our annual budget process again, which will certainly be around Christmas time, and then starting the budget workshop processes in January and February, if I'm advised correctly by the Director. And similarly to this year, we would suggest we'd start the budget workshop process with consideration of the LTFP and any large-scale external factors that might impact on that plan.
Thank you. I'm happy to support the recommendation for the long-term financial plan. I do want to recognise that ideally you would have your long-term financial plan before you endorse your budget, and that was definitely our intent, but obviously things have gone a little bit awry this year. So it's good to set here that we will be working towards that goal for next year. We do have some challenges in that long-term financial plan as well, particularly in the first 3 years in the base case, where we're talking about a 3.8 and 3.5% rate rise over those first 3 years. That's a reality. That's what happens when you don't increase rates at all in a year because of COVID-19. And you also have a reality where you've seen decreased revenue coming into the city across the board and long-term shifts in that. Intentionally, a long-term financial plan is very conservative in its nature, so that ideally you're not surprised and find that you have less money than you thought you did. But then there is always the opportunity that there is upsides things that happen that mean that you have additional funds that are available that you can use for other purposes, but you don't get caught in the situation where you're not able to pick up the rubbish or something like that, because those are core services that we must deliver. The other challenges that we have is there's a large amount of stuff that we're looking at doing in the future, which is supported by our strategic community plan, and we need to find ways to fund that. So there is a big challenge ahead for this council and for administration over the next couple of years to figure out how we balance our asset renewal, which is obviously very much a challenge for us. We have an outstanding audit finding there. The challenge of maintaining a reasonable rate of rates for our residents and meeting our residents' expectations around how rates should go up and at what rate, but then also fulfilling those commitments and obligations that we've made and what we've been requested of by our community. And probably one of the biggest challenges out there is what we're going to do with Beatty Park as well, which is something that is still coming and looming, and that work is ongoing. As that comes back to council, the great thing we have now is we have a long-term financial plan that shows us what that impact will be, what that will mean for the rate space over that time, and then we can prioritise those things. And I think we're going to have some tough conversations and some prioritisation of what we do with our money. Where do those resources go? Do we create new infrastructure? Do we maintain our old infrastructure? What are the things that we need and what we value as a community? Everybody will have a different view, I'm sure. And the challenging path that we have ahead of us is to weave that route through there to balance the assets that we have, particularly Beatty Park, delivering on our core services and delivering our strategic community plan all at the same time without excessive rates rises. I think it was case one in the long-term financial plan, which sort of showed that if we threw absolutely everything that our community was aspiring to achieve, we'd be looking down the barrel of 6% rate rises. Oh God, I've got to pick a different word. Over the next 10 years, which I don't foresee any of us wanting to support going forward. So now we can see what we're aspiring towards doing, and then we've got to figure out how we can fund that in the future at a reasonable rate for the community. There is potentially some upside in the future, depending on what happens with COVID going forward, and there are a few other things that will happen in the future as well. COVID is a challenging one because we could find ourselves in a position like Victoria shortly as well, and everything gets shut down again too. So this is going to be something that we're going to have to be constantly keeping an eye on and managing actively as well. But I feel like we have a good, solid, long-term financial plan now that we can now work on as our base and use that for the critical decision-making that we're going to make going forwards around our assets and our community needs and services as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Loden. Councillor Wallace? Any further comments from other councillors? Councillor Toppelberg?
Thank you. Just wanted to note that there has been some fairly intensive discussion about the sources of income, and so this document is predicated on our existing funding model, which is effectively rates and a suite of government grants that we currently know of and access, but it doesn't explore the unknown, and there's been some strong request from council to administration to investigate alternative sources of incomes and to build our capacity to be able to quote Councillor Loden, to fulfil the desires of the community. That's paraphrasing probably more so than quoting, but to be able to meet the expectations of our community without having to return to, well, if you want more, we're going to have to increase rates. And that's not, I don't think that's a contemporary view of what is expected of local government. I think the availability, particularly for some of the services that are requested or sometimes required of local government. Tonight we're going to talk further about homelessness as an example, and the services that we are being asked to provide or expected to provide, and I'll talk more when we get to that item, but some of those things can and should be funded from sources other than rates, and I think that as that expectation of local government to provide the things that we are really good at, which is on the ground and really accessible, hands-on and community fronting services, and that expectation is ever increasing, that we look beyond just our ratepayers for that income source. So I just wanted to note that that's not something that's been ignored, but it's obviously something that you can't responsibly put in there when it's speculative. So that's something that I and we have expressed a keen desire to explore over the coming years.
Thank you, Councillor Toppelberg. Nothing further. I'll speak to it briefly. I absolutely echo Councillor Loden's commentary in relation to having a conservative long-term financial plan at this time. I would have loved to have had a long-term financial plan that really is, I feel, representative of what our community has told us they'd like us to do. But 2020 has been a year of really paring right back and actually considering what we're able to deliver in the current climate, and what is feasible for us to promise to deliver over 10 years, given the uncertainty of the future. So I'm very pleased that we are at this point of adopting this long-term financial plan. I take on board Councillor Toppelberg's commentary in relation to funding sources, and there's also a body of work for the city to do in relation to reviewing where the city sits. We did a benchmarking activity last year that was really useful, and I know that Vincent, we like to think of ourselves as being, pretty unique local government, but at the same time doing a comparison exercise with other local governments across a number of areas, I think has been a useful starting point. And then it's going to be up to us to ensure that we take that information and look at how our organisation is structured in some of the areas where we're perhaps outliers from other local governments, and to see whether there may be some useful information there that we can build on to ensure that the organisation is running as efficiently as possible. I think I would also like to note that I think that this long-term financial plan that we are adopting does not include elements that we have, new works that we have said that we would deliver through things like our public open space strategy and through the Banks Reserve Master Plan. I think it is a prudent point to actually note that we would love to do those works. I personally would love to proceed with the new works that we've committed to previously through adopting these plans, but this is not the year to do it. And so that is, as Councillor Loden said, that's part of what we need to do is over the coming 12 months is to look at where we're at now, what our community has said to us that they would like to see, particularly around things like open space, that is an incredibly important commodity and has been so during COVID, and to identify how we can reduce our costs or gain additional income to be able to afford to deliver on some of those promises. If there's nothing further, I'll put the item. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Okay, moving on to item 12 no, we're not doing that one. Item 10.4, the Department of Transport long-term cycle network consultation responses. Can I have a mover and a seconder for this item? Moved Councillor Fotakis, seconded Councillor Hallett. Councillor Fotakis.
I'll speak to just substantive, and I do have a small amendment on the table, which I'll wait for others to have their comments. But it's been, I think, a very short process for what we're used to with consultation with our community, with this coming to council, and the stipulation from council to strongly send consultation back to our community and have the community's opportunity to participate and provide their comments, and noting that there were a number of very important changes to the plan that took on board comments from the community to arrive at what we have is an aspirational document in front of us. I'm happy to support the plan. I do note, and I will actually make one comment here with regards to the funding for this, and we've talked just now with regards to the long-term financial plan. These cycle networks are expensive to fund. Traditionally, the City of Vincent has been a really strong advocate in this space. Just let me. I think our support goes back to, and I've mentioned previously, with 2014 and quite significant funding, and we've been quite a significant leader in that space. And I know that leadership has spurred other councils to progress their own bike plans. I frequently have conversations with other councillors who look to what we've done with quite significant admiration, and look forward to them being able to implement similar within their in their communities. But the challenging part of it is that we are challenged financially. We've just passed one of the toughest budgets in our city's history, and we do have competing obligations, including managing a number of significant ageing assets that Councillor Loden did refer to. And we're not alone. This is a sector-wide issue that local governments across Australia face, and it will consume us for many years ahead. So I don't believe that it's just going to be a tough budget this year. I think we're going to see the flow on for many years. So while I mentioned that the long-term cycle network is an aspirational document, we do run the risk that a significant portion of the routes not progressing simply because local government, which is in our current model essentially ratepayers, not being able to afford to progress the works. And I think this is important to note, that this will be irrespective of how passionate, not how passionate that we are, or how committed that we are to increasing the infrastructure or safely plugging the gaps. It's just going to be the reality of not having the money. So I'll end my comment there, and I will actually leave it to a little bit later to place the amendment on the table.
Thank you, Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. I won't add too much, because this is the second council meeting in which we've discussed the Department of Transport's long-term cycle network, and we've kind of canvassed some of the concerns that have been raised previously around lack of opportunity for detailed consultation with the community that we would normally go through. For me, I'm happy to support the, perhaps not happy, I support the officer's recommendation just for the sole reason that it is a plan in which if we do not support it, we cannot access state government funding for any of the routes that are in it. Regardless of whether or not we agree with all of the routes, there is opportunity to change them hopefully in the future. But certainly if we expect to get any state funding, for me, we have to support the network as it is. I do think it's quite an important document and achievement for the Department of Transport in terms of navigating 33 odd local governments to create a very comprehensive strategic document that sets out integrated bike network across boundaries of local governments, which we haven't had to this level of detail previously. And so I think that's a great achievement. And there's certainly a lot in there that I think we can support. And I hope that we can progress some bike network infrastructure not too far away, despite the current climate, with the support of the state government. And there's nothing precluding us, should we get a windfall of other funds, pursuing our own routes that the community tells us are important but aren't in there. So I'm happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Hallett. Council members, Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I'm very pleased we undertook this consultation. Through this consultation, I personally feel that I understand more around the objectives of the long-term cycle network and therefore am able to provide more fulsome support for the plan that's come before us. I think that the next step in reviewing our bike network plan will be able to look at our objectives and then to ensure that there is, alignment with the long-term cycle network, and where there perhaps isn't, then we can work with the Department of Transport on this living document in future if required. But I feel that I understand the Department of Transport's project a little more now and can actually see it on the ground a bit more in Vincent. So I was appreciative of the opportunity to take part in the consultation or observe it. So yeah, and I do think that what we need to look at is that, whether the priorities around cycling on major routes actually means that we need to have actual cycling infrastructure on major routes, or whether it just needs to shadow those routes and perhaps provide a little bit more of a kinder environment for people to cycle in, but still achieving the overall goals of the Department of Transport's long-term cycle network.
Thank you, Councillor Gontaszewski. Councillors, any further comments? Amendments? Amendments. Councillor Fotakis.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. It was just in looking at this, I thought it might be an opportune moment to place an amendment which is before you in the green.
I'll just ask if there's a seconder to the amendment, seconded by Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor. Just in looking at the current the West Australian Bicycle Network Grants program, that local governments can access funding from the state government up to 50% of the total cost of the project. And this has been really worthwhile for us. I don't want this amendment to in any way negate some of the really important funding that we have in the past received from the state government and are in the process of receiving as well. But when we're looking at the networks, and I looked at our own network, and I looked at the bicycle network through other local governments and similar size and even smaller size networks. I looked at really what the cost of those projects and really what the burden would be on ratepayers within that area, and for even looking at our own situation where you've got the primary routes that are going, say, from William Street and other major routes, I believe this places an unfair and disproportionate burden on ratepayers, especially when it comes to considering those primary and secondary routes where we know that they're heavily utilised by residents coming in from other local government areas, and really that discussion of whether that should be a 50% funding by ratepayers within our city, or it should be more. So the amendment is really to request that Welga advocate to the state government to increase the portion of the grant funding available from local governments through this grant program from 50% of the total cost to 75% of the project cost, and that's within it will actually assist with providing some local economic and community support through the state's recovery from the impact of COVID-19 as well. Last month, I noted that the state government had announced a wide range of economic stimulus measures improving our cycling infrastructure. This jumps out as a perfect way to increase to support the increasing popularity and community demand for safe cycling networks, while supporting a relatively low cost of infrastructure project. And I think most of us actually saw that the uptake of cycling during COVID, there was a bit of a boom, not just locally but worldwide. Cycle stores were reporting selling out of bikes, which is really a wonderful thing, but we've actually seen governments across the globe sort of move really swiftly to increase their cycling infrastructure, and I'd really want us to take advantage of that uptake and that popularity swing and really start to move quite quickly on getting our cycling infrastructure just not even just filling the gaps, but to look at it aligning with what we're doing on the network plan. So that was the reasoning behind the amendment to take that through to our Welga zone and take that through to State Council. So looking for your support on that.
Thank you, Councillor Fotakis. Councillor Gontaszewski to speak to the amendment. Does anybody wish to speak to the amendment? Councillor Toppelberg.
Just a question through you to the CEO. What's the effect of the amendment as it's written? What is requests at Welga? What does that actually mean in practical terms? How does that happen?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the City of Vincent is a member of the Welga Central Zone, of which Councillor Fotakis and Councillor Wallace are the city's representatives. And in the first instance, if Council approved this recommendation, the city, whether it was through the Mayor or myself, could write directly to Welga, and we could put this on the agenda for discussion at the Welga Central Zone. And there are quarterly meetings of Welga State Council, which the zone could then advocate to a State Council to adopt. And that sounds like a long, tedious type process, but there wouldn't be anything prohibiting us having this discussion directly with the Department of Transport. So we can make the Department of Transport aware of Council's consideration of this, depending on the result of the vote on this one.
Thank you. So fully support the principle. I think if we were looking to look for sector-wide advocacy for state government to spend more money on something that local government and ratepayers unfairly share the burden, I'd probably prefer state underground power program, the SUP program, which is currently, I think, at 20% or thereabouts, and that's not guaranteed either. As I say, I support the intent, but I think it's, I have my own view on what the chances are of it having any success, and I appreciate the CEO's comments about the length of process to go through in terms of the advocacy, but I personally think that there's better things we could be asking the state to spend more on that would be more meaningful to ratepayers. I think 50% is a significant contribution. I think the chance of getting any more is pretty much nil, but I won't oppose the amendment. But I do think if we're going to ask the state to spend more on programs they currently support that are to the benefit of ratepayers and the community, underground power would be the one to start with.
Councillors, any further comments on the amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare the amendment carried unanimously. We're back to the substantive motion. Is there any further comments? Okay, I'll put the substantive motion. All those in favour? I declare that carried unanimously. So thank you so much to the Deputy Mayor who has advised me that they were the first and only two items that were raised during public question time. And so we will now move through the agenda sequentially, other than for those items that have already been moved on block. So that takes us to 9.2, the Draft Public Health Plan 2020 to 2025. Moved Councillor Hallett, seconded Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor. I figured I'd probably make a more detailed commentary when we get the final version post-consultation, so prepare yourself for that. But I did just want to make a couple of comments about the background to this plan and where it's come from, and place it in the context of local government involvement in public health more generally. The development of this plan is now a statutory requirement under the State Public Health Act 2016, which sets out a range of requirements for local governments to work in this space. That Public Health Act has replaced the majority of its precursor, the Health Act of 1911. So 100 years later, and then it took over a decade of intensive campaigning from the public health community to update the legislation to deal with contemporary health challenges that we face. Two of the key features of the new Public Health Act are that it takes a risk assessment approach to identifying public health harms and preventing them rather than being focused on reactive approaches once harms have already been incurred, and that it integrates a public health lens into the approval processes to ensure that public health risks and benefits are considered. Public health is not new to local government. It has a long history, and many public health policies and interventions originated through local government leadership in addressing sanitation, ensuring safe housing and food, and reducing infectious disease. Prior to our new Health Act, the core role of local government in public health has been of health protection, protecting our communities from health hazards, and generally through the important work of environmental health officers. This work continues and is built upon in the public health planning framework to incorporate a stronger emphasis on health promotion and prevention and addressing the social determinants of health. Public health is integral to all of the work the city does, from our greening program to community events to supporting local economies and the development of built form. Although it's mandated by state government, I think this public health plan is a significant development from our previous Healthy Vincent policy, and I welcome the emphasis on social determinants of health and in particular, the inclusion of public health leadership as a key pillar. I would also like to thank the staff involved in preparing this body of work and look forward to hearing from the community through the consultation process. I do have a minor amendment, but I'll let others speak on the substantive.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hallett. That was seconded by Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I do have some questions. So, and I acknowledge it's going out for consultation, so that there is opportunity for change. But the body of work has taken some time to collate, and what was presented last week to the briefing included a target of smoke-free town centres by 2025. I've read the briefing notes. I was here when the questions were asked last week. I understand the practicalities and some of the questions that were raised, but from a public health perspective and as a public health document, I'd like to know how the target changed from last week to this week, and what the practicalities to me is something separate, but I'm interested as to if you read all of the commentary on smoking that's on page 93, it talks about the evidence and all the background, etc. I find it curious that the public health document itself would change that target. I would imagine it's more an implementation and practicality consideration for council and administration, but as a public health statement that the target is backed by clear evidence. There may not be an answer to the question, I gather that, but I've got my own views on it. But it seemed odd to me that that effectively the officer recommendation and advice as to what the target should be in relation to smoking changed on the basis of a question around implementation.
Through you, Mayor Cole, could I just clarify, is that referring to the change in definition to smoke-free areas within town
Correct.
centres?
So changing from smoke-free town centres to smoke-free areas within town centres, and especially given the question was asked by Councillor Loden last week as to why we could not have dedicated smoking areas within, so effectively smoke-free with dedicated areas as opposed to having smoke-free areas within town centres.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to clarify, I think this was raised in the briefing last week, and my view and the change in the recommendation is that defining town centres that can have a planning statutory context, if we really were just referring to the main pedestrian thoroughfares and the areas of highest pedestrian use or congregation around. So providing some discretion in implementation around what those areas should be and marking those out on a street by street basis is something which we think is practical and something which we can work through with in consultation with the actual business owners and some of the venues in those areas as we go through it, as opposed to just drawing a line around an entire town centre as we would normally refer to it within the statutory planning scheme.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I'm not going to make amendment now, but I just will flag that for me, whether it be aspirational or otherwise, where there is in a public health document such as this, where there's clear evidence that an activity, whilst legal, makes you die, I just think that it's something that we can quite clearly advocate is not acceptable. And if we do need to, because it is a legal activity, we do need to accommodate areas such as around nightclubs, etc., where it may be either impossible or impractical to be able to enforce, given that it is not an illegal activity. I think that's a practical consideration. But as a council, I would be a strong advocate for a public health plan that called smoking for exactly what it is, which is something that makes you die. In relation, I just have another question which I will bring up later as well, and it relates to food and it relates to Beatty Park. I'm not sure when they were installed, but I'll ask it again perhaps when we get to the Beatty Park Cafe lease. But currently most of the signage that's around the Beatty Park Cafe and certainly on the walls appears to be sponsored signage, which is promoting what would be considered treats and perhaps not healthy foods and a lot of ice cream and the like. Can I just ask whether that advertising is provided free of charge, whether it's paid, and who the recipient of the monies? Is it the operator of the cafe, or is it the city that actually gets paid to put that advertising around Beatty Park?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we'd probably need to take that detailed question on notice, depending on what the arrangement is with whether it's a drinks or an ice cream provider, and what the initial arrangement for that signage was.
So I think all of the barricading around the cafe area is currently, it's effectively advertising for ice creams, but I think there's a couple of giant signs that have been erected in the last 12 to 18 months on the walls that talk about it being ice cream time. And some of those sorts of things, I think I enjoy an ice cream, my kids enjoy an ice cream, but I think that in terms of the messaging, it's not just about we've got to have public health plan and we've got, in the recreation facility that we own and operate, I think that we should be mindful of how we represent these things going forward as well. And as I say, I'll ask that question in relation to the lease as well and to the beneficiaries when we get through to the Beatty Park item. Nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Gontaszewski.
I just had a question in relation to Councillor Topelberg, Public Health Warrior, Councillor Topelberg. I'm thrilled. In relation to the change of target from smoke-free town centres by 2025 to smoke-free areas in town centres by 2025, this may be, I'm not sure who would answer this, but just to confirm that there already exists smoke-free areas within our town centres at present in relation to the areas around the playground at Oxford Street Reserve. I believe that would be a dedicated smoke-free area. And I presume any alfresco areas would be, and parklets would also be smoke-free areas in town centres. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that is correct. Outdoor eating areas are smoke-free and playgrounds.
So if we were to write a report on this public health plan, even prior to implementing it, we could say that we've met our target in relation to smoking in town centres?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I guess if you look at the wording of it in that effect, potentially yes. I think that perhaps what we're aiming for is a highly substantial part of town centres to be smoke-free. I think the discussion last week was around the unintended consequences of safety issues for people who are seeking to have a cigarette. So that's pretty much the answer to the question.
Thank you. I will look forward to perhaps an amendment coming forward in relation to this. But look, I'm very pleased that this document's going out for consultation. I would really like to be able to have a conversation with the community about aspirational targets around smoking in the public realm and in town centres. I think if we're going to do so, it's better that we have a conversation around something that's easier for the community to understand. From my perspective, whilst us here in the chamber might know that town centres have a capital letter and refers to an area in pink in our built form policy, I think that most people would really think that the Mount Lawley Highgate Town Centre probably is Beaufort Street all the way down into the Queens in Highgate, which is not reflected in our built form policy. It's, you know, it's not necessarily all of Vincent Street right the way up to Loftus Street. It's, you know, certain parts of Leederville. So I think just from a engagement with the community perspective, I think it would be either useful to define the word town centre in the document, or if we're going to define it as per the built form policy, and et cetera, et cetera. But I think it more accurately reflects where I would like to see that particular project go, to have aim for smoke-free town centres than smoke-free areas in town centres, simply because it just makes me, if you have a smoke-free area in a town centre, a parklet would actually qualify for that. And as has happened to me, someone may choose to leave that parklet and literally stand right next to it and have a cigarette, which is just, you know, hugely frustrating. And I would think that that sort of behaviour might be considered to be okay under a smoke-free areas in town centres kind of arrangement. Other than that, I think that this document is going to be incredibly useful in ensuring that we have public health impact assessed as part of our decision making. And I think that's actually like the really big ticket item here. So, and I'm not sure how much will be made of that through the consultation, but for me, that is something that I think from the purpose of how this can be implemented, I think will be very useful for the city to ensure that I liked the word public health lens on our decision making in the future. Yeah, I'll see if anyone else wants to speak and may foreshadow an amendment in relation to the target on smoking.
I think Councillor Loden just got his hand up before you, Councillor Vatakis, but you'll be next.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to add to Councillor Gontaszewski's comments, I would support the idea of us being more specific in that idea of a town centre. I actually went to a fathering project event on Friday night.
Does anyone actually just want to move an amendment? Yep. Because we're just focusing on this discussion of town centre area. So I think if we're just going to continue to discuss it, it's probably might as well just be during an amendment. But sure. Just before you do that, I'll just check with Councillor Loden. Is that the only issue that you wish to speak to?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Are you happy with that course of action? Because
yes.
I just don't wish to just interrupt you if you wish to continue just to debate the substantive motion.
I'm happy to make my comment as my substantive comment on this as well. So
okay,
that's fine. Right. I attended a fathering project event. Carla Callahan was this presenter at that event, and he actually raised the topic during the presentation as well, as he had a conversation with his child about this. And he said it was great to see that the City of Vincent was taking this step, or was about to debate this step, and had a conversation with his child to say about why this was important and why this was happening and stuff like that. So I think this is an important and bold step that the city can make in this area. And I think we need to be clear that we are looking to ban smoking in the whole of the town centre. And if we need to create small specific areas where people can smoke for other reasons, I think that's fine. But if we have that broad intent that broadly across that whole town centre area, it is smoke free aside from these specific zones, then I think that's a good result. So.
Okay, I'm now going to call for an amendment. Councillor Gontaszewski.
Can I please move an amendment to, hold on, that the recommendation, now I've got to get to the recommendation. It's 1 point. No, that hasn't been moved. So that there is a, item 1 is changed. There is a set of, at the end of attachment 1, it says subject to, and then adding a new 1.1. And then the new 1.1 would say amending the public, is it? The public health, amending the target to read, now I'm in the wrong, smoke-free town centres by 2025.
Can I call for a seconder, please? Seconded by Councillor Castle. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Gontaszewski?
Just to say that I think I appreciate that it's a pragmatic approach to look at implementation, but I also think zero waste to landfill was a lofty goal, and yeah, we're still working towards it. And so I think this is also something really valuable, and it's been useful to have that zero because it helps you to focus on the nuance rather than just the big ticket item. So my preference would be that we aim for something, we have a target, and then we implement a series of projects to achieve that target.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, look, I support that amendment. I would have been very happy to support this public health plan in its version that we saw last week. I think the key words here is public health leadership. We should be trying to set the way for our community. And I'm very comfortable with an aspirational target, even if at this point we know there may be some challenges to it. I'm also very conscious that this is a policy that's going out to the community for consultation. So I'm interested to hear their views on what they think of that target. But I think being quite clear in what our goal is important, and we do have 5 years to determine what the actual practical application of that is, and how we might allow for some of those challenges. So very happy to support.
Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm very happy to support the amendment. I think it is very important that when we're going out to the community that we do really encourage some discussion about smoke-free areas. And I've often talked about my first job as a new grad from university back in the 1980s, working for the WA Health Department. And one of those roles was going into hotels and cafes and restaurants and introducing the concept of smoke-free zones. And I can tell you that I've been told to go away, inverted commas, in a whole range of ways when you're actually posing a concept like that. I was accused that I was advocating a measure that would ruin their business, drive their customers away, send them into bankruptcy. And it proved to me that change was difficult and it can be slow. When we're now talking all these years past and we're still debating and nibbling around the edges of smoke-free areas, I'm very happy to support really even that discussion with the community about why it's important for us to be looking at this point in time. But one thing I also learned was this change takes really strong leadership. I was really fortunate to work with some really fantastic business people back in those early days. Neil Jackson, who many of us here in Vincent will know as the former proprietor, the owner of Jackson's in Highgate. Well, I worked with Neil when he opened his very first restaurant in Bunbury called Louise's, and he was one of the very first to jump on board with smoke-free areas and then went smoke-free. And another was the late Tony Ashbolt. Tony was the first general manager of the Lord Forest Hotel in Bunbury. And they had the Barron's restaurant. Both Louise's and Barron's were multiple Gold Plate Award winners, and they were amongst the first to step up. And what they showed me is that, you know, really people that it's not just always about looking at the economics in one way. That I looked at the economics and the advantage of really moving with the community, but also to that importance, as Councillor Topperberg touched on, it might be legal, but this is a drug that kills, and there's no doubt about it. The data is important. We're a data-driven council, so I think it's very important that we always go back to the data when it drives not only the decisions that we make, but those aspirational goals and the targets that we set. So I'm very happy to support this.
Thank you, Councillor Fotakis. Councillors? Well, I'd just like to say thank you, Councillor Gontaszewski. You've actually done me a favour, because I did flag at the last meeting that I might move an amendment, but that opportunity was taken away. The recommendation changed. That was not my intent. Obviously, I'm always happy to table amendments and debate them in this chamber. I had no idea that that would actually happen. And I'm also really pleased to tell you that I'm also happy to change my mind. Over the last week, since this was debated at council, I have actually really delved deeply into this issue. I've had to do media interviews on this issue. I've received emails on this issue. I've talked to people about this, and you know, I can actually see that this is a good direction to go in. I think that as long as we make sure that people have a safe place to smoke in town centres, if we have designated areas, or in making sure that those who can't kick the habit and will be wandering off out of perhaps a licensed venue after having a few drinks, we do need to make sure that safety is still considered and that they are smoking in well-lit places, hopefully in our busier town centres where we have CCTV within the capture of CCTV. Same concept as when we changed our taxi rank, we moved it up the road, but we made sure that it was well lit and that it was within capture of CCTV. So those were my primary concerns. But over the last week, I have been really inundated with a lot of support for this direction. I think that this idea of an area of a town centre was really intended to capture a vast area, but not to be a designated term as captured in our local planning scheme. So look, my view on this has really shifted during the week, and I think that the sentiment has been great, and it's been also really fantastic to see the support of Health Minister Roger Cook and the state government on this position. So very happy to support this amendment back to the original. Are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? I declare that carried unanimously. We're back to the substantive. Councillor Hallett, you've spoken. Do you wish to ask a question? Oh, you want to move an amendment? Of course, go ahead.
Thank you. I'll just be quick on this one. I'd like to propose an amendment for 1.2 for another change to some wording, which is to replace the term lifestyle choice with either health behaviours or behavioural determinants of health.
Is there a seconder? Seconded, Councillor Fotakis. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Hallett?
Just to say, I think it's consistent with a lot of the rest of the document, which is focused on a social model of health to avoid language that can be used as victim blaming and focus more on other determinants of health.
Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to reference how professional that the amendment was, with referencing all manner of references in there as well. And I won't embarrass Councillor Hallett with referencing that one of those is his own, but maybe I will. I was very impressed.
Councillors, any further comments on the amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare that carried unanimously. We're back to the substantive. Does anyone who hasn't already spoken to the substantive wish to speak? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare the draft public health plan carried. Okay, next item 9.3, minor strategic review 2020 strategic community plan 2018 to 2028. This is an absolute majority decision. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Move Councillor Topelberg, seconded Councillor Gontaszewski.
I did ask a question last week, but have nothing further to add. So happy to support the officer recommendation.
Councillor Gontaszewski.
Happy to support the officer recommendation. I think that we note some of the commentary in relation to the SCP not having specific enough information to enable a detailed or quantitative assessment to occur. It's something to consider the next time around. Whether or not a document of this nature actually has specific success measures into it, it is ultimately up to the reviewer to be able to determine a methodology of assessing and auditing. So I'm pleased to see that that has been implemented. I think that next time around we probably need to be a little bit more detailed in relation to the extent of our success and activities or otherwise. But yes, I think given the circumstances that we're in terms of COVID and resourcing, etc., I think that this is where we're at with this, and I'll support this time. But got another couple of years to get the next one right.
Thank you, Councillor Gontaszewski. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare that carried unanimously. Item 9.4, extension of temporary change of use planning exemptions. Okay. Can I have a mover and seconder? Just noting Councillor Topelberg has left the chamber. Moved Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded Councillor Wallace.
I support the officer recommendation.
Councillor Wallace, do you wish to comment?
No, thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Any comments? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Declare that carried. We can ask Councillor Toppelberg to return. Thank you, Councillor Toppelberg. Next item is 10.1, update on homelessness support. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Move Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just a question. Well, it's not sitting under infrastructure and environment, so it may be a question to the CEO, just further to the comments that I made about the long-term financial plan. Just in a broader sense, I know about our responsibility and our desire to work within this space, and especially considering our geographic location, we do have a disproportionate both responsibility and representation of our community who are experiencing homelessness, but just perhaps seeking some general comments about the level to which local government is expected to participate in this space and to fund its participation, and not just the services, but the ancillary costs that are associated with it. I mean, it falls under the remit of the state, both in the state government, but the state in a broader sense. And when I look at the action plan and we look at the strategy, there does seem to be an increased expectation on local government to be participating, and just perhaps some comments about how that interacts with the state's view and also with the funding level that's provided by the states as we grow our responsibility in this space.
Through you, Mayor Cole, probably the briefest comment I could make is that this is an exceptionally difficult issue for all members of the community and local governments to manage. There is an active and live debate, particularly around the City of Perth and the CBD, and there have been associated issues related to the Wellington Square and the redevelopment that's happening there, and also Weld Square within the City of Vincent. This will only resolve itself in the positive with local government and state government and a large number of charities and non-government organisations working extremely closely together. And the model that we've moved to is focused more on assertive outreach and specific case management of individuals who are experiencing homelessness. And that's what we've been trying to instigate around the Weld Square, as well as that close cooperation with the various service providers and charities and not-for-profits who are providing a range of different services to people experiencing homelessness. The theme from some of the media discussion around the City of Perth this week was that there's absolutely an imperative for the state government to address this issue in the immediate and short term, and that hasn't been the case recently, and there's been a lot more focus on medium to long-term outcomes in terms of new accommodation facilities. But it is something that we've been working very closely with the City of Perth on in terms of the accreditation framework and making sure that service providers are providing complementary, not duplication of different services, and that our role is working both in that community support area, as well as addressing some of the community safety issues that then relate to some instances of antisocial behaviour. And that's where that difficult line becomes between the role of a ranger at local government level and the role of state police.
Thank you. Just you did mention about some of the longer term matters, and public housing and the provision of state housing is obviously an ongoing issue. Is the city aware of any? I understand that there's a property that the Department of Housing own, which is on Smith Street in Highgate, which has been vacant for a number, or boarded up for I think 6 years. now, thereabouts. And I know that there was some talk. Are we aware, perhaps it's a question for the acting director, but are we aware of any movement in relation to that lot and any proposal? I know that there had been some drawings and presentations in broad form to council many years ago, but is that something, has there been any movement in relation to that or any other major public housing developments within our local area?
Through Mayor Cole, to address the Smith Street development, you're right, there was some movement in terms of consideration of what could be developed there. However, that has not come to fruition and we have not seen a revised proposal, I guess, from that perspective. That's probably the key type of housing and such. So.
Thank you. In relation to recommendation 4, that talks about the engagement with Manor Inc and Uniting WA, I think the briefing notes referred to sort of conversations continuing and a meeting potentially being scheduled. Just wondering if the Executive Director of Infrastructure and Environment can provide some commentary on when that meeting is due to occur.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that meeting's not been arranged yet, so I can't give you a date.
Okay, so I'm really conscious that we have an approval period for Manor Inc.'s usage of World Square, and it appears that we are in a little bit of, I don't know, like inertia in relation to what's going on, or I don't really have a tangible understanding of what is going to be proposed or what direction discussions are taking. So I'd like to propose an amendment to item 4 that deletes the words before the end of the current approval period, bracket 30 November 2020, and replaces that with at the next ordinary meeting of council.
Councillor Gonchevsky, the other potential issue is the expiration of the Moore Street precinct. Is that something that you would also consider as part of the amendment?
So I understand from the briefing notes that it's the intention of administration to discuss the Moore Street precinct with Manor Inc, but I would be happy to add to my amendment after the words suitable location, comma, including the Moore Street precinct, comma.
Is there a seconder for the amendment? Seconded, Councillor Toppelberg.
I don't really think I need to speak to it. I'm just really conscious of our timings, and that I would like to have some more information directly for discussion prior to the approval lapsing.
Thank you, Councillor Toppelberg. Do you wish to speak to it?
Just a question. So that moves it back effectively 2 months because it has to be reported to September. In order to not be a late or supplementary item, additional, okay. Just so that we don't run supplementary on the report, what's in order that so that it appears in the briefing agenda, when would that meeting have to take place in order for that report to be written? Because my guess is it'll be in the next 5 to 7 days at the latest.
Yeah, through my call, I guess it will be in the next fortnight. That's correct.
Then I'm happy with it. That's fine.
Councillors, look, I do think this is an important amendment because Councillor Fotakis, Gonchevsky and myself were part of an original meeting with Manor Inc and staff where we did talk about the option, not just of Tranby House, but also of the Moore Street precinct. And I would certainly like to be in a position ahead of our next consideration of Manor Inc continuing at World Square, because the intent of council was to actually trial Manor Inc moving away from World Square to another location to see what impact that would have on World Square, and it has been a long-running issue over a long period of time. And I think that we have, I mean, I've certainly given indications to residents and business owners in the area that this is an undertaking and something that we had intended to do. So I think that we do need to have an update next month to really see where that's sitting. Also that Uniting Care West, while they are refurbishing their kitchen, etc., they are effectively moving from a open day centre operation to a outreach type of operation, and I think that could have a dramatic impact on whether Manor Inc. can provide a meal service for some 100 or so people requiring a meal service, because I think that intent of Tranby House is no longer to operate in that way. So I think this is very important that we get a further update on what the options are for Manor Inc. prior to us having to make that decision in November. Are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? I declare that carried unanimously. Back to the substantive. Is there any further commentary? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare that motion carried. Okay, the next item is 12.1, progress update on the Sustainable Environment Strategy 2019 to 2024. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Move Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm very happy to support the officer recommendation in this case, noting the amendment on the blue, which I'll leave to Councillor Hallett to move. Thank you.
Councillor Hallett.
I was expecting more from Councillor Loden on that. I won't speak to the substantive.
Okay. Does anyone else wish to speak to the substantive before we do have an amendment on the table? I would say that the floor is yours, Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. As Councillor Loden said, it's on the blue. So this amendment seeks to add to the motion a series of recommendations in relation to support and advocacy for the integration of health, climate and equity concerns into our recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. The pandemic has profoundly impacted us all.
Before you continue,
Yep.
I'll just see if you have a seconder. Is there a seconder? Councillor Loden had his hand in the air first. Off you go.
Thank you. So the pandemic has profoundly impacted us all, and the disruption it's caused on us socially and economically provides a unique opportunity to do things differently. It's not just a global health crisis, but also a social and economic crisis, the effects of which will be felt for years to come. Tonight, we're discussing our public health plan, our sustainable environment strategy, and our COVID-19 relief and recovery committee, a timely indication of how all of these are interconnected and that our ambition should not be a return to normal, but to build a better, more sustainable, more resilient and fairer society out of the recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. The amendment requests Council support for the Statement of Principles announced by the Mayors of the C40 Climate Leadership Group in May this year, advocate to other tiers of government to adopt the principles, and for administration to consider them as part of the implementation of our Sustainable Environment Strategy and the proposed Public Health Plan. The principles align with our existing strategic direction and actions taken to date in our response to COVID, and this amendment will support the City to advocate to state and federal governments at a time when extraordinary policy shifts have occurred, where science has informed government decision-making and in the lead up to the next state budget. The amendment enables us to amplify our own voice with other local governments through C40 and is an opportunity to firmly outline the intersection of economic, social and environmental reform at a time where a massive government program of stimulus and recovery has been mobilised and could address public health, transformation of the economy and the climate crisis together. Responding to the COVID crisis has seen governments, albeit with some international exceptions, ditch long-held ideologies and been forced into pragmatic policy responses. To meaningfully respond to the climate crisis needs the large-scale innovation and huge economic boom that is poised to happen out of this pandemic. It's also an opportunity to tie the public launch of our SES with an advocacy statement that actions the intent of the strategy. So I hope you'll support it.
Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. Well said, sir. The only thing I'll add is that overwhelmingly the place where action on climate change is taken is at local government. It's either by local governments taking those actions themselves or where state or federal governments put together targets and actions which then is funded and then those actions then flow through to local governments to deliver. So I guess the power of this I see is not only in doing that advocacy, but then also hopefully that we see those funds being made available so that we can strengthen our own actions locally as well as also delivering on the climate crisis as Councillor Hallett pointed out.
Councillors, any further comments? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? Declare that carried unanimously. We're back to the substantive. Do you wish to speak to the substantive now, Councillor Hallett?
Only just, I look forward to the SES being launched, I guess, more publicly as well. And I think there was some discussion last week about some of the reporting. So I'm happy to support the recommendation as is, but I think it'd be worth us having some more discussion about some of the metrics in future to assess the progress.
Councillors, I have to say I completely agree on the metrics and the system of reporting. I think the Plan, Do, Check, Act, I'm not sure if I got that in the right order, but I'm not sure that that's sufficient for something where we're actually measuring the impact that we're having in the environment. And I know there might be some limitations to what we can measure, but I certainly think that's very valuable discussion to have going forward. But very happy to, I think we do need to really publicly launch this plan. I think we could start with talking about some of the achievements that we've made since we adopted it last year. And also really tying that back to the fact that we have a fantastic new sustainability advisory group as well. So when you actually look at the plan and what our targets are and some of the actions that we have underway, I think it is pretty impressive. And I think that just in terms of what we're doing, even with a very restricted budget during COVID times, we're still very much focused on greening Vincent, moving forward with solar PV. I always have to say thank you to Councillor Loden for being a champion in that regard. And, you know, we have definitely still saying that our enhanced environment priority is still very much critical to the work that we do and remains a priority for this council. And I think the sustainable environment strategy is the document that shows that. Is there any further comments? Okay, I'll put it, all those in favour, declare that carried. Okay, so then we are moving on to 12.2, amendments to the new lease to HISP Proprietary Limited, Beatty Park Cafe, 220 Vincent Street, Leederville, in case you didn't know where Beatty Park was. Councillor Toppelberg, moved, seconded by Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. So it relates to my earlier query, and just I appreciate the answer is not available, but perhaps a question through to the Manager of Governance. Are we aware that within the scope of the lease, once the our public health strategy is endorsed, for example, would things like advertising of fatty foods in Beatty Park, would we have scope within the lease term to be able to ban them or strongly encourage them not to be used if the lessee, so for example, if all the barriers that separate the cafe from the rest of Beatty Park are advertising ice cream that's not necessarily made in the healthiest way, and that's something that we took a view was not appropriate for either a city-owned facility or for Beatty Park, does the current construct of the lease allow us to request or insist on that being changed?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll just refer back to Council's original decision on this at the 10th of December Council meeting. So one of the recommendations was actually that the CEO enter into an MOU with the cafe operator to outline the healthy food options to be provided and sustainable waste management initiatives to be used. So that's something we still haven't finalised yet. So that should address, well, just the healthy food options. I'm not sure if it would go as far as the signs, but we can look into that and discuss with the health team to address that. I don't think we can stipulate the exact content of the signs, but we'll review that as part of the MOU.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate that the question I asked earlier, that the answer is not readily available, but I think that I guess what I'm more concerned around is particularly that the advertising message, and particularly with Beatty Park and the indoor area being so focused on young people and first-hand experience of young people seeing ice cream as something aspirational and as a part of going to the pool and going and doing exercise or enjoyment that ice cream comes along with it. Yeah, I think it would be good to have some framework around that, and given that the lease term is 3 years in the scheme of things is not extraordinary, if it's not something that we're able to deal with, for example, if they've already made arrangements for all of their signage to be provided by what would be considered a non-healthy food provider, and we can't change that, 3 years is not the end of the world, but it'd be good to keep that in mind for any future lease to this operator or somebody else.
Thank you, Councillor Toppelberg. Who was next? Councillor Loden.
No comment.
That was easy. Anyone else wish to comment on this item? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare it carried. Item 12.3, extension of term COVID-19 Relief and Recovery Committee and amendment to terms of reference. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Move Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Again, I did ask a question last week. Given the length of the extension of term, I'm not overly fussed, but I think that the extraordinary powers that were provided to the committee, in my personal opinion, have served their purpose. I have no issue with the COVID-related matters being discussed specifically within a committee or working group environment. I don't personally see a need for the decision-making powers to remain, because I think that the provisions of the Act provide that to the Council as a whole, and certainly with the awarding of tenders over $250,000, to me, the ability to call a special council meeting to be able to reinstate a committee that has those powers is available to us within a matter, that opportunity is available within a matter of hours if there was an urgency to do so. That said, as I said earlier, given that it's only 3 months, I won't seek to change the recommendation, but I do think that I would like to see that if COVID becomes an issue again locally, or more so than what it currently is, or if we look at the relief and recovery aspect of it as something more ongoing, that it move to a working group structure, and that the same responsibility that we took to provide the powers to a committee level for that decision making, that we also remove those and provide it back to the full council process of briefing and decision making. That was all.
Councillor Hallett.
Just a question along those lines. I know that there's a lot of the decision-making powers have been removed from the terms of reference, but just in relation to the tenders of 250,000 above and disposal of property, just wondering if I can get a couple of examples of where the CEO feels that that would be required to come to this committee and wouldn't be able to come to a special council meeting.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can't foresee any of those large-scale financial items coming to this committee in the next 3 months that couldn't be taken to full council as normal.
Councillors, any further comments? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare it carried. Item 12.4, amendment to council delegations. Delegation to issue a heritage conservation notice. An absolute majority decision is required. I have a mover and seconder. Please move Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded Councillor Wallace.
I support the recommendation.
Councillor Wallace.
I too support the recommendation.
Thank you. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare that carried. Item 12.5, approval of governance framework. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Gontaszewski. I just looked around the room just to check if anyone else wanted to put their hand up, so I come back to you.
It's like we're back at DAP. She was so excited you weren't here this week. Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just a couple of... I appreciate the need for it. It does read like a lot of words for words. I think a lot of what's in there is a base expectation of community of what we do, and I think that it seems like a lot of words in the document. What I did want to ask was the CEO gave a response to the question from the gallery, I think the last council meeting, which related to or it might have been 2 meetings ago, which related to the code of conduct. And the response was that because of the existence of the draft or the mandated code of conduct for elected members, that effectively that we would develop one for staff, but the code of conduct for elected members would be the one that exists, which is mandatory. Given council's leadership in this space and desire to have a for example, our own view on gifts, our own view on lobbying, our own view on representation to media, etc. Can I just check? Because my understanding was that the code of conduct, the intent for the code of conduct to be reviewed and endorsed by council following each local government election, effectively had everybody sign up to it and have put their hand in the air to acknowledge it in a public forum. Given that the view you expressed was that the mandatory code of conduct would suffice for elected members, if we wanted to pursue our own, does that require a motion to council? Is that something that we can expect a review to come back to council? Would it be tied in to the staff code of conduct, which is proposed to make an appearance at council at some point? Can I just get an idea of how that document could, or beyond the mandated code of conduct, how you as the administration would view that process would evolve?
Through you, Mayor Cole. So we are waiting for the Department of Local Government and the State Government to finalise the amendments and their proposed mandatory code of conduct for all elected members throughout the state in reference to requirements over and above that council would be wanting to enshrine and embed. That could either be in a hard sense, could be through a council policy, adoption of a formal council policy, or taking those aspects of the current code of conduct that council wants to be enshrined over and above the state government mandated code of conduct into a council policy, or if it was a soft approach, then it could be incorporated within this governance framework as the shared understanding by council of how it goes about fulfilling its functions and making its decisions. So either a hard sense through a council policy or through a softer sense through incorporation in the adopted governance framework.
And just for clarity, short of an amendment now to delve into that, that's something that would arise through discussion and or a notice of motion at a subsequent meeting?
Through you, Mayor Cole, just in relation to gifts, for instance, we have outlined in the proposed governance framework council's policy around gifts in the limits of $50. You did reference one other aspect in terms of the developer contact register, I think in particular, which can be incorporated into, which is the reference is already incorporated into this governance framework. So it could, council could harden the status of the framework through adopting it as a policy, for instance, but it's a council adopted and published policy. We would suggest, and we're recommending that it's updated within the first few months of each new council election and new formation of a new council with new elected members. But it's up to council to amend this document at any time.
Councillor Gontaszewski.
So we've just approved tonight the draft public health plan to go out to consultation, and one of the areas in the public health plan relates to our public health impact assessments and essentially incorporating the public health lens in our decision making. So I thought it could be convenient to consider an amendment to this recommendation along the lines of noting that subject to the outcome of consultation on the draft public health plan, that the governance framework will be amended and represented to council to include a public health impact assessments in council and operational decision making. Just prior to deciding whether or not I would put such an amendment, I would be grateful for some commentary from administration on this.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we've temporarily lost our manager of public health and wellbeing because their item had already been previously considered, but the proposal that you just outlined, that wouldn't cause us any concern once council has formally adopted the public health plan following consultation. So that's something that could be considered in the next few months when we come back with the results of the consultation for the public health plan. For instance, then council could choose to amend as part of the adoption of the public health plan following consultation, a corresponding amendment to the governance framework, which we could update at that time.
Okay, well, I guess I would like to put an amendment for item 4 that we, along the lines of what I just said, which was to request that subject to the outcome of consultation on the draft public health plan, that the governance framework is amended to include public health impact assessment as part of operational and council decision making.
Are you seconding? Thank you, Councillor Toppelberg. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Gontaszewski? Are there any comments from the seconder? Okay, we've just got funny goggles. Anyone else wish to comment? Right, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? Declare that carried. We're back to the substantive. Any further comments on the governance framework? Yes.
Can I just say, I've read this a few times now and it's growing on me. So I encourage everyone to roll through it a few times.
Yes, I'd just like to say thank you to the Manager of Governance for pulling this one-stop shop together. It's a very valuable resource, so thank you for that. All right, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare that carried. Okay, the last item for the evening. It is 12.7, the information bulletin, and it is a wealth of information, so who knows where this debate could go. Moved, Councillor Hallett, seconded, Councillor Toppelberg.
Just so I can ask a question. Can I ask about the quarterly tree removal report, which details that jacarandas were chosen to replace 3 trees on Carr Street and trees on Anzac, Walcott and Alma, through the Mayor to the Director of Infrastructure and Environment. Wondering if you could describe how those decisions were made and how they align with the tree selection tool recommendation for those sites. And I guess the weighting given to the tree selection tool versus other inputs.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll have to take that question on notice.
Any other questions or comments on the information bulletin? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare the information bulletin carried. Okay, so there were nil items against items 13 through 17. So that just leaves for the closure of the meetings. I'd like to thank everyone for attending this evening and for joining us on the live stream and coming into the public gallery, and declare the meeting closed at 7:43 p.m. Thank you.